I will have to say is I read both of these books, Nigeria Jones and Promise Boys, and I saw myself in them. I come from Jamaica, Queens, and have lived where you're living in two lives, and there's a lot of things where it's like the nuances of they got that. I see myself, they see me. And I can share that when I was a young girl, books changed my life. I wish I had authors like this when I was growing up. I didn't have summer camps, I had books. I love the way these two authors express the lives of BIPOC teens and how they sometimes have to navigate different worlds, honoring who they are and trying to reach into new worlds. And whether that be the hopes and dreams of getting into a school that has the power to transform your life and outcomes, and the complicated realities that are uncovered in the book Promise Boys, or in Nigeria Jones, where the main character is dealing with coming to her own realities of exploring race and culture and systemic institutions as she navigates to form her own opinions and her own future. The award-winning author, Ibi Zoboi, comes a powerful story about discovering who you are in the world and fighting for that person and having courage. Promise Boys also takes unexpected twists and turns. It has become a blockbuster. I wasn't prepared for the thriller aspect of it, so you surprised me. But it was very interesting how teens of color have to investigate their own principal's murder to clear their own names as they were immediately assumed to be culprits. As I mentioned, I saw myself in these books, and I hope you can too. I hope they open your eyes to these young characters, the worlds they live in, and I want to thank Ibi Zoboi and Nick Brooks for creating these stories. I hope you have many more. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce them. Ibi Zoboi is from my native, New York, and she is the best-selling author of American Street, Pride, My Life, An Ice Cream Sandwich, Star Child, Okoye to the People, the award-winning Punching the Air, and also the Coretta Scott King Honor Award picture book, The People Remember. She's also the editor of the anthology Black Enough. She's appeared in CBS This Morning, The Read Out alongside Yusef Salaam, and many other places. I will say that she's an educator and has been recognized through grants, and she's also worked for many arts organizations, such as the Teachers Writers Collaborative. We appreciate that she has come here from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and was raised in New York City to create so many beautiful stories. I won't go through all the awards and honors she's received because we'd be here all day. Nick Brooks is an award-winning author. He's also a filmmaker. He also writes hip-hop. He's a 2020 graduate of the University of Southern California's TV and Film Production Program. He has a short film, Hoop Dreaming. He's currently in development of his feature film, We Were Born Kings, filmmaker, as well as an educator working with at-risk youth. He's also the author of Nothing Interesting Ever Happens to Ethan Fairmont. And he published, as well as, in addition to this YA, a middle grade novel, Nothing Interesting Ever Happens. I'd like to welcome you both. Thank you for being courageous and telling the stories that so many people need to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monique.
I want to thank Monique. I'm from Jamaica, Queens, too. What high school did you go to? Yeah, what high school?
I went to an all-girls school.
Which?
Maryland's Academy.
St. Francis Prep. Catholic school trauma bonding. Yeah.
Oh, man. Perfect. Well, thank y'all for being here. Evie, I had the pleasure of reading Nigeria Jones. And I have to say there's a few things that struck me. I mean, first off, is just beautifully written. Like, the phrases, the metaphors, the similes, your cadence, everything is beautifully written. So for me, I mean, we can certainly dive into the book, but we're just connecting, and I'm always curious about how people started their journey. Your voice is so clear, and it's so, you can feel it dripping off the page. I'd just be curious of your own journey. You know, how did you get into writing? Was it always writing for you? Like, how did you know that this was the thing? And yeah, I like to know. I like to start there.
Thank you, Nick. So Nigeria Jones is my 9th book, and Nick's Promise Boys is his first book. So I don't feel like a veteran because it's 9 books in 5 years. Like, it's really a short amount of time. So, yeah, there is something when we did start talking, we were just like, did anybody show you the ropes? There is something to learn about being an author in the world and what that means, and all the nuances of just speaking truth to power in our fiction. But I've been writing my entire adult life. I started out loving speculative fiction most. Science fiction was my jam. It's still my jam, but it's not having a moment right now in young adult literature, and that's okay. Every time, like I was telling someone, every time I got into genre, and this was like 15 years ago, right out of college, trying to write fantasy and science fiction, it just wasn't the time now. So if you all are readers of young adult literature, it's a thing that's happening now, and I just missed the curve, and it's unfortunate that there is a curve in our business. It's the business of selling books, and selling books, you are appealing to people's tastes, and there are trends, and trends are a very real thing for young people. And when you're an artist, you want to write what you want to write. But you can't ignore the trend. I really want to ignore the trends and hope that my readers find the books. I hope to. Recently, and we can talk about this a little bit, in the New York Times, there was an article on young Luddites. And a Luddite, Luddite, is someone who is against technology. So in Brooklyn, and I do know the high school, young people are gathering, are coming together and opposing technology by iPhones. Some of them have flip phones and they don't have any social media, or they deleted their social media, or some of them are rejecting cell phones altogether. And they're coming together with their little guitars and their, little young hippies to just be different. So I mention them because I want to reach those readers who will read a thick, like 400-page tome about a girl's journey, and those readers are out there, and we are writing for them in the same way that you're writing about young boys of color in urban spaces. And that's what I love about your book. We don't often see those schools in urban spaces that are trying but are still problematic. And the mystery element in there. So my journey is one that has taken me to just not being, being ahead or behind the curve, but still trying to write the books that I want to write and share with young people. How about you? How has it been with your first book?
It's been amazing. I started this journey, as was mentioned early on in my life.
Can everybody hear Nick?
Okay. My mic,
Okay, you speak into the mic because I can't hear you either.
Started early on in my life through hip hop, right? And that took me many different places. I became an educator. I was teaching. I taught all over. I mean, I taught at-risk young men, high school and middle school. I did that for a few years before I joined a program called Teach for America. Then I taught early childhood, taught kindergarten and first grade. And that's where I noticed that there weren't a lot of books that featured characters that looked like my kids or spoke about communities that looked like ours. And so that's why I first started writing. Then I went on to film school. I went on to USC film school, graduated in 2020. And we all know what happens in 2020. And so everything shuts down. The film industry shuts down. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. I just spent all of this time and money and resources going to this film school. And so I started writing. I started writing books. And, for me, it was about, very similarly, just about connecting to the things that matter most to me, connecting with my community, connecting to the kids that I had mentored over the course of my journey, and telling stories that will resonate with them. When I was young, I don't remember, other than Walter D. Myers, maybe Omar Tari, I wasn't really reading much, you know what I'm saying, until I started reading books that were beyond, Walter Mosley. I was reading that at 13, which I probably shouldn't, or maybe Hardy Boys, you know what I'm saying, but it wasn't a ton of books that featured characters and talked about the things that me and my friends were going through. And so, I say that I write for the reluctant reader. I write for the readers who are, maybe not drawn to books naturally or are not yet introduced to them in a way that makes it stick to their ribs as it should. That's been my journey, and it's been great. my favorite part of this all is going into those schools, going into the very high school that I went to, and talking to those same kids, sitting in the auditorium in the chairs that I sat in. I mean, that's the beautiful part for me, and same principle and everything, and you know what I mean. So, and not to mention right down the road, you know, I'm from DC, if you can tell by the accent, and so you know this is home, and so coming back and being able to do this right outside of DC is all great for me. Yeah.
I wanna. You said something that sticks to me, that you write for reluctant readers, and I want to take this opportunity to say that by virtue of us being Black writers. We are not always writing for reluctant readers. I am also writing for the avid readers, and that yes, I was not a reluctant reader because I just needed the right book. So when I write a book with big, long sentences and big words, I wouldn't want educators or librarians to think that this is not accessible to their kids of color, because that's simply not true. I was reading Ursula Le Guin in high school. One of my favorites was A Left Hand of Darkness, written in the late 1960s, hard sci-fi. I discovered Octavia Butler early on in college. I was reading 400-500 by junior and senior year, really looking for those dense texts because I was that nerd. So, you know, yes, there were reluctant readers, and yes, there are avid, voracious readers who want depth and nuance
100%.
In their writing, and I think we both present that range. And just because we are writing about Black children doesn't mean that they're all, you know, one, they're not all living in urban spaces. One, they're not all in, you write about a charter school, all male charter school, all BIPOC. And I'm right, my character starts a Quaker school, a predominantly white Quaker school in Philadelphia, and it's a Quaker school for a particular reason. But there are, you know, Black kids in Quaker schools,
100%.
Independent schools, Catholic schools, schools in the suburbs, urban spaces, charter schools, public schools. So I love that we're both have that range.
We're not a monolith. And to your point, you know, exactly what you just said. People, they're not reluctant readers because they don't want to read. They just haven't found the right book.
Right, absolutely.
And so I think we're totally on the same page there. Now digging into your story, like you mentioned, it's set in Philly. One of the first things that struck me was like instantly for me.
Speaking to the mic, Nick.
Call back. Can y'all hear me?
Okay. Oh, okay. I maybe because I'm like right here, right? Okay, and you're right there.
It's just you. But one of the first things that struck me was it reminded me of Move.
Yeah.
And I was curious about just like why this story, you know, why now? You've said that it's deeply personal to you. And I was curious kind of like what inspired this journey, what inspired the journey of Nigeria Jones?
So I was born in Haiti, and if you know Haiti's history, was first slave revolt, successful. I mean, they kicked butt, and sac passe, right? That's right. So I am bringing my own Haitian history into the story of a girl who is half Haitian. Her father is a militant separatist leader. MOVE was an organization that existed in the 70s and 80s. They still are around now. That were anarcho-primitive in that they were radical. If you think of left, think of far left. Like they're so left, they're not even on the spectrum. So one of the books I like is a memoir called Educated by Tara Westover. And I love that. And I cannot relate at all. Tara Westover, Utah, extreme Mormon, way off the grid. On the surface, I don't relate. But when I read that, I was like, I know some Rastas who are like that. Bob Marley, Rastafarian, there are Rastafarian communities that are very separatist, even while they're living in this country. So the MOVE organization, they grew their hair long. They didn't believe in animal cruelty, so they kept animals roaming in the house. Most of them were plant-based before plant-based was a thing, vegan. Didn't believe in schools. When you talk about, what do you call that, free-range parenting? This is free-range parenting on steroids. And they were doing this in the city of Philadelphia, and their lifestyle clashed with their neighbors, who were also people of color. And their compound, which was several buildings on a block in Philadelphia, was bombed by the Philadelphia Police Department. So it's all over, on the internet. There's a documentary about it. They're all over the news. Several stories about them. And on May 13th was, the anniversary of that bombing. But it's a nod to the MOVE organization, but it's also a nod to, I wanted to write about that it's not just like fundamentalist Christians or extreme Mormons or Amish. There are different people of color, Black people who are extreme in their ideas as well, and who take their constitutional rights very seriously. And one of those rights is their Second Amendment right. And this is a 16-year-old whose father is the leader of that organization. One of the things that he teaches her is how to shoot a firearm. And she does not. She starts to question everything when her mother disappears. So the Quaker part of it is my commentary on the fact that Quakers were radical in their ideas, and that William Penn, who founded Pennsylvania, was a Quaker, and how we've gone so far from some of those ideas of the founding fathers, and some of the founding fathers were radical Quakers as well. Quakers were the first abolitionists. These are all like the cerebral underlying themes in the book, but ultimately it's a girl finding her way, starting school at 16 for the first time in her life. And as you can imagine, we were all teenagers. She goes buck wild.
Well, all of those themes come through in the book very, very clearly. And for Nigeria, she has an interesting journey because, like you said, she starts in this organization that's led by her father, Kofi. But then she goes to this all-white, predominantly white school at 16, and her world is kind of shaken. I shared with you that I went to Oklahoma University from D.C., and so
He went to Oklahoma University.
I went to Oklahoma, and mind you, before that, I went to an elementary school called Roots. Roots Activity Learning Center in D.C. that was started in D.C., which was very similar to the movement that Kofi was founding. And so I understood that, right? And so it was interesting watching Nigeria have this kind of shift in consciousness and think, is this too far? Is this too radical? The things that her father was saying, is there a whole nother perspective that I've been missing out on? So for Nigeria, what does liberation mean? And, she constantly saying, one of the goals of the movement is to, divest, right? What does that mean for her as she's going through her journey? What does it mean to divest from America?
Well, her father had one idea of divesting from. And when we think of all the things that are wrong with this country, there are people who have taken their freedoms in their own hands in positive and negative ways. So her father takes the freedom, his home is sort of a space for anybody who needs it. But here is this 16-year-old girl who's he's creating an army around her because he's taking in young men, and that she has to call her brothers, and men her father's age that she has to call uncles. And you could sort of imagine what sort of toxic masculinity, and I want to talk about toxic masculinity, that this girl is surrounded by. And when she goes to the shooting range, she's the only girl with all these men. So she's trying to divest from that. So it's sort of a nesting doll of different kinds of freedom. Freedom for people, and then freedom for a 16-year-old girl. What does that look like? And, and I'm gonna pivot to you because this isn't a one-way conversation. One of the things that I particularly was interested in your book, Promise Academy, is an all-boys school in an urban space. I'm a mother of a 16-year-old boy, and I've considered taking my son out and putting him in a all-boys private school because certain things have transpired. But I don't know how healthy that will be.
Yeah.
Especially after reading, I'm just like, oh, there are certain things
Yes.
that I haven't considered because
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh, less distractions, right? And
Yeah.
I was almost sent to Mary Lewis Academy,
Yeah.
but I begged my parents. Monique and I grew up, went to high school in the same neighborhood, so Catholic school, and this is where I got the idea for the Quaker school, because I went to a Catholic high school. When I was there, out of 700, there were 20 black kids. So I, pulling from that experience, and I wanted my son to have that. So, but you really describe from multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
First and foremost, there's other things going on. First and foremost, the toxic masculinity that could happen in an all-boys school, and I've never really seen that in any book. And the layers of hierarchy,
Yeah.
from Principal Moore
Yeah.
down to the students accused of.
Yeah.
I'm not giving anything. No, I don't know who did it, but Principal
Yeah.
for boys accused of murdering their principal,
Yeah.
and the ranking system,
Yeah.
that happens in between there, and
Absolutely.
including one girl's voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
We're seeing it in this country,
Yeah.
and in terms of activism, we're seeing it.
Yeah.
Push back, all the
Yeah.
governors and so and so. I
Yeah.
think women come into the conversation when it's school board meetings or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's talk about how our young people are dealing with toxic masculinity.
And for those who don't know, Promise Boys, it was described. It's a book about a lot of things, but at the heart of it is about these three young men, black and brown boys, who are accused of murdering their principal. And over the course of the book, they have to investigate this crime to clear their names, even if they suspect that any one of them could have done it. It's inspired a lot by my own experience as an educator, working in charter schools, also just being a product of the DC public school system, and the things that I saw, how the students are treated, and a lot of what you talk about with the toxic masculinity is true. It's a lot of those are real experiences. I've seen security guards, principals, vice principals, the way that they treat the women who work at the school. It was always bothered me. I was raised by a black woman who, and I saw oftentimes how she was treated and how that made me feel watching how my mom was treated, right? And so I think for me, it helped to develop a perspective of how black men, how men interact with women. And so I wanted to put that in the book because I don't think people realize just how toxic and sometimes unsafe it can feel for women inside of schools. For America, if you don't know, this program is where they take, the brightest kids, really tough schools and charter schools. And I heard countless stories of women coming through Teach for America having really tough experiences at these schools because of the way that or spoken to by their male counterparts. You talk about putting your son in the all boys school. There's a school, DeMatha, that's not where there was a story about boys at DeMatha and were calling up escorts, and they're doing all of these things at these all boys schools because these type of mindsets are kind of left to fester if there's nobody to step in and teach the right thing. So. I don't know if I'm getting away from your question, but for me, it was just important to put that in a book, again, for educators, for parents, and for students, right? For students to read, see, understand the theme, and realize that their behavior and the way that they act and speak as it pertains to their relationship with women is not the best way to go about it.
Wait a minute, I want to add another layer to it. I was talking about that, but then I also wanted to. When I'm thinking of toxic masculinity, I'm also thinking about the relationship between the boys themselves and the leadership, who are also men. So in my book, there's the separatist leader, my character's father, and a love interest, who's a boy, and the dynamic between the men around her. Yeah. How that, while it may not be towards her, how toxic masculinity can be between men and boys, between boys and boys, between men, and how even if it's, even if there's no, females in the group, how that can affect girls and non-binary young people. So in your case, it's the leadership and the young men that they're supposed to uphold and help in that dynamic.
Yes. Well, speaking, thank you for bringing that up. Because one of the themes there for me was, yes, toxic masculinity is also how we parent our young boys, right? Because for me, I heard this phrase actually talking to another DC author, Jason Reynolds, and he used the phrase parented gently. And for me, I wasn't necessarily parented gently. And as an adult, I realized that the reason that I was parented that way is because my stepfather understood that when I go out into the world, I'm just seen as a black man. And, the idea that the world's not going to love you the same way that we love you in this house. And so we have to sharpen you in a way that makes you walk this very straight line so that when you go out to the world, you won't be destroyed. And so you think about kids like Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, like the list goes on and on of young black men who were destroyed when they go out into the world because they didn't move in a particular way. And so when you talk about that toxic masculinity, for me at least, putting a lot of that dynamic in there was really talking about how do we treat our young men of color. We're extremely hard on them to the point where they have to be tough. There's no room to show emotion. And all of these different things because we're trying to raise this man to go out in the world and be able to succeed, and so we're actually causing ourselves more harm because Principal Moore, the principal who's killed in the book, he thinks he's doing a good thing, right? He thinks he's putting the tools in their toolkit to go out and be successful and to navigate a world that's gonna otherize them, but he's breaking them. Right, and so that toxic masculinity is literally breaking down these young men, and so that's kind of what I wanted to touch on as we talked about the dynamic between these men and these boys.
I do the same thing because my character's father, as I mentioned, takes her to the shooting range and tells her is basically raising her as the son he never had, and he's doing the same thing for the young men who come into the. And I don't want to say commune, I'm telling it from the perspective of the insider's perspective, but it's a cult-like community. And they do create a commune for themselves. And he does think that he's doing something positive, but ultimately, as we know with cults, it can be harmful and repressive and oppressive for the people who participate in it. And we have we're writing from the unique perspective of the children who are in these spaces. But what you do that is extra unique is you're also including the adults. There are how many points of views in this book? It's multiple
over 30
point of view. Mystery. And the voices are very distinct. How did you get into and when I say point of view, they're not long passages from every single. It's just snippets. You get snippets of a community centered around these three boys who were accused of a heinous. It is.
Yes.
Murder is.
It's dark.
It's dark, right? But there is a way that you are creating this nuanced perspective of a community where it's not just like violence. And they're coming from violence and it ends up in violence and then, lock them up, throw away the key. How did you get into all those perspectives and what was your intent for doing that?
So the first part of that question, getting into those perspectives, was really writing from what I know. All the characters in the book, whether be it a bus driver or a basketball coach or a lunch lady or a school nurse, all of these are people that I really know, right? People that I've really met, really come across in my own journey as an educator. Even the three boys, they're all amalgamations of kids that I've worked with, kids that I've coached in Little League football, even pieces of myself. So all of the characters I'm pulling from truly just from what I know. And even when I'm thinking about the voices I'm a kind of a visual guy, so I'm just visualizing all my interactions and my experiences with these people. And as far as like my intent, you said the perfect word is community. I wanted to give the sense of community, the idea that you're just dropped. I wanted to really transport you to Northeast DC and you're in this community and you're understanding the POV of all the people around these boys, and everybody has something to say, right, about what happened and who Principal Moore is and who these kids are. When I became an educator and I worked in the community, that's how it was. Before I even met the kids, I heard all the things about the community. I heard all the things about the kids before I even met the kids. I heard these from other teachers, other administrators. And then when I actually met the kids, they were just kids. You know what I mean? They were full of love. They were full of joy. And for me, it was the same way, right? In Promise Boys, we meet the community before we actually meet the boys. And the purposes of that is for you to start to develop a picture of what these boys are going to be, all for that to be completely turned around when you actually meet the boys. And you speak about, like, how do we keep the balance, right, where it's not all dark? It's because when we meet these kids, they have crushes and they have dreams and they play basketball and they want to cook and they love their grandma. All of these things that make up a kid that we don't really get to see when we just see their face plastered on the news, or you know what I mean, or we see a headline or whatever, you know, whatever have you. So for me, it was just about really taking you to that community and reversing expectations. So when you meet these kids, you're like, wow, they're dynamic. But then also, of course, it's a mystery. So I want you to develop an expectation of these kids. So when we come to the murder, there's pieces about their lives that you know that will make you question if these boys could have actually done this crime.
And you know, I do something similar where I introduce you to the community too. For readers who look like the characters in our books, they may not be familiar with a community, because we're also writing about a kid from, you know, Vermont, who lives in, you know, Missouri and doesn't know the urban spaces very well. So no matter who we're writing for, we always have to have that layer of introduction. So I open up, my community is, again, like a separatist community, and they have rituals and celebrations that are unlike anything that people are used to. And there's, you know, I forgot the name of a documentary about boys, like boys being these two boys who have to navigate independent school system.
Got you.
But
Okay.
I mean, it's not a mystery and it's not dark, but it is about boys who are trying to get into private schools. And their journey, the mother documented their journey in these private schools and all the things that come with it. One of the documentaries called Baraka's Boys.
Okay, yeah.
You know that one, set in Baltimore, I believe, right?
familiar.
And I forgot that what the other one is. It's one of those like Promise type of titles where it's all about black boys and their education. Now, something that happens in my book, and I want to speak, you know, see if you agree, is this idea that young people and their rites of passage. Like, in this culture, we don't have anything letting young people know that they are adults now. I think the only thing that we have is high school graduation and all the shenanigans that go on around prom night. And then we throw them to the wolves and send them off to college for the most part. And we are both writing young adult literature, and in our stories, we have to take our characters through some sorts of rites of passage. And for your characters, your three boys, I mean, it's a traumatic rites of passage. And what do you think of this idea of the emotional, you're writing dark mystery, the emotional journey of your characters? And I don't know if you feel like you've got into the skin of each of your characters. I write yours is plot driven. Mine is character driven. How do you allow the readers to get to know the boys, and how did you get to know the boys?
I really allow the reader to get to know the boys through a few things. One, their biggest fears, the thing that they dream for most, and then their closest relationship. That was kind of my way of developing the characters and who they are and what they want and how you can follow them on this journey. And for all of them, they have really big dreams. You know, one of them wants to play basketball. One of them wants to go away to college. One of them wants to open a restaurant. And they deal with a lot of disappointment on this journey because of the accusations that they're facing. And for me, I guess, when you talk about rites of passage, you know, I don't know if I'd say, by the end of Promise, I don't know if I'd say, like, they're adults now. You know what I mean? Like they can go off and be adults now. But what they do come up against is an idea that you know, the world won't always be kind to them, and how to navigate that, like basically how to navigate adversity, right? And that's something that they're going to take with them into adulthood, because like you said, you go off to college and you're constantly hit with problem solving after problem solving after problem solving after problem solving, right? And in this book, they're solving a very huge problem, and I think for me that's their coming of age story, is the idea of solving this problem and the other piece of it is doing it together, right? They start very fractured, and they start, again, kids, and you spoke about this, we spoke about this offline, but like kids start in these places where they're fragmented, particularly in DC, a city that's like carved up by like these smaller regions. They all come from this small region of DC, and they're fragmented because of that. And then they learn that together, they're much more powerful, right? And so that's another thing, I think, as far as a thing that they're going to take with them into adulthood, that an experience that these particular boys have in the book that the kids around them won't have, is understanding what it means to work together, understanding what it means to problem solve, and understanding what it means to stay firm and have faith in the face of adversity. And, I mean, what would you say for Nigeria? Because she goes through something that that I think is, because again, I come from a city that is very radical, right? It's very much, you know, and so going into the world,
DC, yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Is
you know, on both sides,
on both sides, right? And you go into the world, and she's with her dad, who has these really, really radical views. And by the end, you know, she's with this white boy Liam. You know, she's at his house getting drunk, and it's like what she's going through is really crazy, because it's like something that for me I didn't learn until much later in life, that when I leave DC, the world's not going to be all black. You know what I'm saying? When I'm in DC, I'm with I'm just in all black communities, and this is the space that I'm moving in. And I'm really curious to hear from you. Do you think that her father is doing a disservice to her? Do you think that he's doing a disservice by create, you know, again, it's a double-edged sword, because it's the safety of like, okay, we're brothers and sisters and we're a family, but then it's like the world doesn't, this is not actually what the world looks like. When you go out into the world, you're going to have to work with people who don't look like you. And so for me, that's something that I had to learn much later than Nigeria is learning. And so talk to us about that and her journey. And is that something that even your kids had to go through, or, you know, what's your thoughts there?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll say my piece, and then we're gonna open it up to questions.
Yeah.
But that's a great question, because right now on the news we're hearing about one type of extremists.
Yeah.
And you know, if we're here at this book festival, I think we're kind of all on the same page about those certain extremists who don't want our books on their shelves. And you could ask them those same questions. In terms of, why don't you want those kids to read those books? You know, the world doesn't look like, you know, West Bubble F Utah, whatever this is, you know. And don't you want them to read about people who look nothing like? I would want you know, a Mormon girl, a fundamentalist Christian girl in Missouri, in the Ozarks, to read about Nigeria Jones and says she looks nothing like me, but I get you, girl, you know, and be able to, you know, hold on to her story and see the allegory in the story. And we all, as young people who write for young people, we always use Rudine Sims Bishop, mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. That books can be mirrors or windows or sliding doors where you can step into the skin of another character. But yes, the father does think that he is doing something good for her, in the same way that all those parents at the school board meetings think that they're doing something good for their kids. But they're not, you know, they're not forward thinking. They're not thinking that maybe their child will want to travel one day. I prepare my children for the world beyond. But in trying to keep them, like I teach them Black history or give them Black books so they could be solid in who they are before they venture out. Here is who you are. Here is what the world may think of you, but you still have to step out into the world to get to know who these other people are, with compassion and understanding, even if the world treats you a certain way. And I would want, you know, those parents who are banning books to say, you know, maybe they're a little too many curse words. Maybe they're doing a little nasty on the page, but I know your peers are up to that, and I've read your texts, or the world. This is your world right now.
Yes.
I cannot control the world that you are going to inherit, but learn as much as you can so you are prepared, because I don't want you up in the basement when you're 30 years old. As I'm coming from that perspective as a parent too.
Yeah.
So that is how I see it, in that whoever reads Nigeria Jones can see the flaws in their parent the same way that my character sees the flaws. And I would want, like there are the school that I was thinking for my son is an all-white Catholic school that it looks like a boys' club, and I'm like, well, maybe they'll have discipline, but then I would want them to read Promise Boys and see themselves in the book.
Learn,
And say like, okay, this isn't a $50,000 a year school, but same kind of thing is going on, Thank you. We're gonna open up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for maybe one or two questions.
For Mr. Brooks, going through Promise Boys.
Oh, you want a mic?
Hello.
Hi.
When I was reading Promise Boys, jumping from everyone's perspective, one thing I noticed is all of the characters could kind of be considered villains from someone else's perspective, but they also themselves seem to be doing the right thing, or they certainly thought they were doing the right thing, whether it was an educator or even someone involved in gangs. They all thought they were trying to, do the right things for the right reasons. Is that something that you've experienced, from all your teaching jobs and going around? Is that something you've noticed about people, that they're trying to do the right thing, but may or may not be effective at it?
100%. Like when you talk about gang members, right? You have gang members who are protecting their community, or say, hey, I can't get a job anywhere else and I got to feed my family. You know what I mean? Is everybody has a perspective, and my whole thing is like not looking at any one person and seeing them one way. It's all about trying to understand the other perspective. And a lot of in Promise, when you jump to these different POVs, everybody thinks they understand the other person without taking the time to really get to know them, right? The same way that the educators think they know these boys, and the boys can't even speak in the school. How can you get to know them? You can't, and they can't even talk. So I think that's a great question. But yeah, totally. I feel like I see that in people. There's always a perspective. There's always somebody else's shoes, and I think we should do more in trying to be in the other person's shoes and seeing their perspective. And I think that'll help us start to work together a little more.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you. Another question. We have one up here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Question to both of you, but starting with Ibi. I loved Pride,
Thank you.
and this is a craft question. I'm so curious how you inject your voice and change character voice between Pride and Nigeria Jones. And Nick, you've mentioned that you have 30 plus points of view and are clearly each very distinct. So just from a writer's perspective, how do you tonally, create that shift in, within a book or across different books while keeping it cohesive, but also making it yourself?
If you asked me that a few years ago, I wouldn't know. But now, several books in, I realize it's how songwriters or musicians make their art, in that I hear them first. And in the same way that I hear different people in different voices, I think as writers, we are natural observers and we listen very closely. So I can hear, I can hear a character that sounds like you and a character that sounds like you, simply because I've heard those voices already and I can see them. So it is a matter of listen tonally to people's voices, and then working in the cadence of the words. There are certain things that all your POVs have a different cadence, and it shows up on the page, and not everybody's using the same slang, and there is, I think, the white girl in there,
Yeah, it is. I did TFA.
Right. So, what?
I'm Teach for
Teach for America?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm saying, I say that because TFA is made up of mostly white women, and so it's like, again, to your point of like hearing voices and understanding voices and being a songwriter, it's like I'll be honest, it's imitation. You know what I mean? It's imitation, and I'm like, I know these people. I've heard these people speak. I know their cadence. I know the words that they use, and then I put it on a page. You know, and so for me, it wasn't too much deeper than that. Another thing for me is like music gets me into different mindsets. You know, like let me listen to a song or to a sound that gets me into a particular mood. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's just the idea. I would totally agree. It's just listening to voices and internalizing those voices and then kind of spitting it back out. Yeah.
And it's not even the main character, your side characters too, and that's how you write dialogue. Yeah. Cool. One more short question. Short? Okay. Well, thank you.
So the characters in your book all have some level of trauma that they're trying to get through. One that stuck to me was when Nigeria had to say, I lost my mom and then I had to birth myself. Where do you find inspiration of how you're going to take your character through that trauma, and how do you feel about it as you're writing it and helping the character get through it?
Oh, all my books have some level of trauma. It can be losing a neighborhood. It could be losing a mother or a friend. I just like writing about sad things. And I think we write those characters. We're writing to help young people get through difficult times. I'm writing that. And, I've even in my romance, there is some level of hurt and pain that my characters are going through. They are grieving, and I think those makes for better books, I think, sometimes, because you're holding on. You want young people to be like, how did you do this? How did this character get through this? So I think that's what I gravitate towards, the sad things in life, and having our books not be didactic, but some sort of guiding light for the reader. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Same, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's our time. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for those questions.